Hi everyone, I'm BGG member Madman M.
I'm BGG member Katie, although you may know me as Pikachulita.
When we're actually talking about why we see so much medieval Europe within either historical games or fantasy games, just Europe is everywhere in any game that takes place basically like anywhere before the 16th century. Fantasy was one of the biggest things that even today we see holds a lot of interest for people, and because fantasy unintentionally has that relation to medieval Europe because of its influences by C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, we still see this today. So you see this even somewhat with Harry Potter. Even though Harry Potter takes place in a more modern setting, kind of, you still have those medieval sort of Europe influences in the way that a lot of wizarding society dresses, operates, their aesthetic choices from clothes to music, architecture, the way that they don't have really a lot of modern devices in the wizarding world as well. And especially you see that with Game of Thrones, even though I don't think as a society we really talk about Game of Thrones anymore. You see that so much. It is such a massive influence on the Game of Thrones universe, medieval Europe.
I think the reason why this setting is explored so much in games is just because it's one of the more popular, eras of history, really. And I think part of that is because, during those times, a lot of things were recorded and actually written down in a way, in languages that are more easily deciphered and things like that. And I think that medieval European times, especially white societies, had that privilege of sort of having a lot of that time period, a lot of that era documented. So much stuff was written down. There's so much art existing from that era. I mean, it's kind of nice, it must be nice for them to have a huge amount of their history and artifacts and documents and art still intact. And I also think that, since our society today is very heavily influenced on, the ideals and values from medieval society, I think that's another reason why we kind of, why games especially sort of heavily, rely on this era to do a lot of their storytelling.
Every history and every side of the story deserves to be told. And because of the oversaturation of medieval Europe in locations and historical eras, the story has become very much one-sided. Even if it's just fiction, even if it's from solely fantasy, it has become just sort of all that you see now. So you've seen popularity and success, massive success with games where even if it is from a medieval standpoint, if it's not medieval, like Ghost of Tsushima was very popular, was a beautifully designed game.
Obviously there's, Japanese historians, and there's been so many aspects of Japanese history, whether it's, documents, writings, et cetera, that have obviously been translated. But, some of this stuff hasn't been. So it's a lot easier for you to just do a simple search of sort of European-based history, especially, medieval, specifically medieval Europe, where you had these sort of Latin-based languages and you had actual English being spoken. It's a lot easier to find the resources for that.
If you decide to take a game and make it based off of a non-medieval setting, say, for example, going back to my recommendations for what I would love to see, if you wanted a game based off of medieval South Korea, you would then need to, it would reflect what you would put in game, your hiring sort of processes and who you will need to contact and bring onto your team, which would then not only add diversity to what is represented in your game, but also in your hiring practices, who's working at the studio. So people who are working behind the scenes will become more diverse as well. You'll have more diverse teams because you need people who have this knowledge and experience to be able to then give you sort of more the information that you need to make this game accurate and beautiful and interactive and good, while at the same time making sure that the things that are represented in game are accurate.
One of the historical regions that I would love to see portrayed in a video game is Mesoamerica. For For those of you that aren't aware, Mesoamerica consisted of various different regions across Latin and South America, including Mexico, Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and also extending down into the western side of South America along the Andes mountain range. Various different cultural societies made up Mesoamerica, including the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, and the Olmec, along with many others, and these societies flourished for over 1,000 years during pre-Columbian society, which was the time period before Spanish colonization of the Caribbean and Americas.
One of the first places I would love to see a game feature for a historical period would be the Ethiopian Empire to start, mostly because it is such a deep well of history from the Ethiopian Empire, and it's such a not that much talked about piece of historical information. So just to provide a little bit of background, the Ethiopian Empire actually lasted a little over 700 years. It was one of the few native African nations to be able to successfully resist colonial occupation during the scramble for Africa, which no one really tells you that in any history class. So I think that would make a great topic of conversation for any game, especially because you have that interactive element of being able to really immerse yourself in the history and culture of that time period. Something I would love to see is just sort of not just the actual history of the time period be examined, but also would love to see the culture, things like music, food, architecture, anything else that really defines what it was like to live as a part of this empire, as a part of the people from this time period. So I would love to not only be able to see that replicated on a grand scale for any sort of game, I would also love to experience it. So I think that would be a really cool to have as a video game.